Dear human being, beloved soul, I welcome you to my podcast series, Conversations with the Universe. After a near-death experience, my perception of our human existence changed profoundly. I became more sensitive, with all our known senses. I feel more intensely, see people with different eyes, and often take a different perspective on life and our challenges. In my books, I share these altered perspectives and all the knowledge that has flowed through me since my near death and thus record it. For all those who are searching for something more, for the meaning of our existence here on Mother Earth. And it is now a great pleasure for me to share this knowledge with you in this way as a supplement to my books. This season I am dedicating myself to my very first work, the basics of being. I wish you many wonderful insights on your path. Thank you. Love.
First, a quick note about my network, SPINE. This is short for the Spiritual Network and is the first global social media network for holistic knowledge, awareness, spirituality, and above all, a bridge between providers and seekers. I invite you to join us and connect with me there. Feel free to look around, find lots of podcasts, events, healers, but above all, lots of inspiration to grow. It's free. But now let's start with today's episode. Humans think in hierarchies because they separate things. In reality, however, there are no hierarchies because there is no real separation. Nevertheless, it helps the human mind to function in such hierarchies. Every impulse needs visionaries who give birth to these impulses and other people who implement them. In principle, however, the initiators differ from the executors only in that the former perceive the impulses and the latter do not. But they all carry the potential within themselves. Other beings exist in other states and levels. They are energy in different states and forms, but always only energy and always connected to the origin, the source. Therefore, it is very helpful if, as here, you briefly familiarize yourself with the respective levels and their entities. If you are interested in more intensive communication with other entities, then you must note the following. 1. Communication with the deceased. A very widespread misconception maintains that the deceased are more knowledgeable than the living. This rumor is based on the assumption that out-of-body experiences are equivalent to omniscience. This leads us to believe that we should have a certain fear of authority when it comes to these energies. The fact is, however, that an out-of-body energy certainly perceives things differently than it did during its lifetime, mainly due to the different perspective from another energy level and the state of altered perception. But that does not make this energy omniscient. At this point, I always like to cite the example of my grandmother. Imagine, for example, that you always had a lively communication with your grandmother. When you met, there was always a lot to talk about, such as the latest news in your life and many other things. Your grandmother was just a grandmother, with many old views and a lot of her own life experiences. But one day, your grandmother is so old that her soul leaves her old, fragile, and worn-out body. She enters the first energy world and remains there from now on. Nothing except this space and her immateriality has changed. Your grandmother is still the same person she was before, with all her experiences and opinions, views and standpoints. So if you now call upon your grandmother's energy through a medium, you will experience exactly the same being as the one you knew as your grandmother in her body. Would you have asked your grandmother during her lifetime how you should decide on certain problems at work, what the lottery numbers would be, how your life would continue, and what you should do? When and how? No, because she was your grandmother, and you talked to her about other things, but not about prophecy. So why should you do that now? Nothing has changed. Only the way we communicate. So know that the departed souls are certainly happy to help when you ask them for help and advice, but also know exactly who you are contacting. 2. Communication with non-incarnated beings. As you learned in the chapter Energy Worlds, there are beings who have never incarnated into a body. They are also on completely different levels and have their own tasks. If you contact such an energy that has never been incarnated, you will receive interesting information and tips from this being. But you must also be aware that these perspectives have not been tested in practice here in the material world. Therefore, when dealing with serious existential problems, it is sometimes not very helpful to call upon a being that is completely unfamiliar with this type of existential fear and has never experienced it. Answers such as love everything and everyone you encounter are correct and important, but in the example mentioned above, they are not effective and not really helpful for you. 3. Communication with beings that have already incarnated. In the case of existential problems described above, it can therefore be far more helpful to call upon beings who have already been incarnated. They can provide you with more specific information from their wealth of knowledge and experience, but above all, from the perspective of the other plane. 4. Communication with sages. One plane I very much enjoy contacting is that of the wise brotherhood. I perceive the forms of this very high vibrating plane as white and very knowledgeable. As already mentioned in the chapter Energy Worlds, they introduce themselves to me as the wise brotherhood, and there are certainly others who have had the same experience. Some refer to them as masters, others as gods, but terminology is relatively irrelevant on such planes. In fact, these are all just attempts to describe a very ancient, knowledgeable, and very pure energy. It is the highest attainable and comprehensible energy of the cosmos for us, which can convey information to us as white and therefore as unfiltered as possible. There are many books around the world that can give you detailed information about the wise brotherhood. I would just like to briefly mention here that you can learn ancient knowledge there. It is the group of beings, some of whom visited Earth in the person of Jesus, for example. If you want to experience real knowledge, knowledge that is not intended to solve the relatively minor problems of human existence, but encompasses deep soul wisdom, then the wise brotherhood is the right place to turn to. You know that purity is part of the foundation of being. The purer the filter of the being you call upon, the clearer and more unfiltered the answer will be for you. The wise brotherhood is so pure and its message so unfiltered that you can experience and understand direct knowledge from the source through it. 5. Communication through a medium. It is perfectly legitimate and understandable to use a medium to establish contact with other worlds and other beings. However, caution is advised when it comes to the transmission and, above all, the interpretation of messages. The cosmos has no language, but uses the translator's perception as a tool. As you know, everything is energy, and energy is information. The information, the message, or even the message, is therefore the content of the consciousness of a particular energy unit in what is known as hyperspace. It is available there at all times, and yet is integrated into the mechanisms of transformation that are inevitable due to resonances. In fact, however, it is always valid. Whether the questioner is of Chinese, European, or African descent, for example, is absolutely irrelevant, because the medium draws the information from the non-spatial realm of eternity, from an energy field. When a medium works through the visual perception of energy, the actual images that appear arise directly within the medium itself. This medium is a channel that recognizes the sought-after energies, information, or messages from the sea of energies, and can thus translate them. However, this translator, the medium and its conversion machine, is always a kind of filter, a kind of wall through which this information must pass in order to ultimately be put into words, into the words of the language we speak and understand. And this is precisely what poses a great danger of distorting these messages. Every human being is bound up in the past, the present, resonances, vibrations, the world of thoughts, a certain flexibility of mind, openness of heart, training in non-judgment, existential fears, and a very unique world of perception. All of this makes it almost impossible for a medium not to always bring their own thought model with them, which filters the information. Therefore, I advise you to rely specifically on word of mouth when choosing a medium, or to read the feedback of others on portals such as the Spine app in order to get a picture of the work of the person who transmits the messages, and to better understand how much a filter can evaluate and thus distort images. It helps to focus on dreams. 6. Dreams. Dreams are also a form of communication with other worlds. I think it is now widely known that we do not always remain on Earth, i.e., in our gross material realm, at night. However, most people experience this state rather unconsciously. In fact, we have all been given the tool of dreams at birth, and they can be a wonderful task and experience for training the muscle of consciousness. For example, it took me a long time to even recognize this tool as such. Of course, we are all familiar with those meaningless dreams that supposedly have nothing to do with the present. They certainly exist, but even these images and pieces of information do not come out of nowhere. In general, however, when we dream, we find ourselves in an energetic space that has little to do with our physical perceptions. If you begin to open yourself up to this fact and direct your consciousness toward remembering everything you dream and recording it immediately, you will not only gain interesting, extraordinary information, but also train your consciousness at the same time. And thus, bit by bit, you will recognize different information because you suddenly perceive it. You will be surprised at how far-sighted, wise, and clear dreams can be, and how pleasant it is at the same time, because you don't have to ask anyone else to get the answers you are looking for. In doing so, you will effortlessly enter the next level of awareness, where everything is always and everywhere at the same time, and you only have to learn to open yourself up to it. In summary, I would like to address your sensitivity and caution, but also your courage that you too can receive the images and only need to learn to interpret them correctly. Otherwise, it will be strangers who interpret the images for you, and they do not know your life, your concerns, your views, and your desires. They can only try to convey the messages to you, but certainly not always correctly. To avoid this, it is helpful to find a medium who simply passes on the messages. However, this is a very high art, and there are not many people who can keep their filters so pure that they can really do it. On the other hand, it is problematic in that it is important to reach and ask the right being. You have to decide whether you are looking for concrete answers from the deceased and their still contaminated filters, or whether you want to seek more far-reaching, wiser, omniscient answers from higher vibrating beings, some of whom have never even incarnated. Both are helpful. It's just that one has more access to realistic answers and the other to philosophical ones. All in all, it is important to realize that you do not need to ask beings to answer your life's puzzles, but rather you should train your perception to such an extent that you can obtain the answers from other planes all by yourself. Through the flexibility of your consciousness, it is possible for you to learn to view the current issues affecting you from other perspectives and thus from other planes. If you encounter one or more beings there, you are welcome to communicate with them. If you only want to learn wisdom, it is very helpful to inquire about it through the Wise Brotherhood. But if it concerns specific things that affect your life and your existence on this earth, then you yourself are called upon to listen within yourself. In fact, the beings of the various levels do not want to interfere too much in your development. Life is growth, discovery, and the unfolding of yourself. This process should take place as undisturbed and uninfluenced by more knowledgeable, clearer beings as possible. In the best-case scenario, you have managed to become so aware of the connection and thus of yourself that you have become absolutely connected to the executive tool of your soul's home. This soul home is so close to the source that, through this connection alone, no problem of matter here seems unsolvable. Therefore, the somewhat opaque possibility of communicating with other beings is always a call to you to grow yourself through the solution. Nevertheless, I would like to encourage you to also discover the energy worlds and their entities. It trains your mental agility and at the same time makes you even more aware of the possibilities of being. And as you know, only life offers the chance to train, experience, and develop all these things at the same time. Take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to next time. And I would like to remind you to join our community Spine. We are a community that wants to help you live a healthier life, practice your spirituality, and expand your consciousness. We help you find and connect with healers around the world, and we help you give your life a new meaning in different ways. We are Spine, connections that help.